Now I am not signed in. Let's sign in again. So now I am signed in. I have a UID. And I'm not signed out from Firebase until I call sign out. If I refresh the page, instead of clicking sign out, as far as Firebase is concerned, I'm still signed in. But my app doesn't know that. UID got set back to null. So this is something I think we need to handle inside component will mount. So our Firebase authentication object here has some other stuff. Let's look at authentication, the introduction to. It brags about how easy it is to use. That's pretty cool. The sign-in flow, all right, sure. We want to do this on the web. Set an authentication state observer and get user data. What's this all about? Firebase auth on auth state changed. For each of your app's pages that need information about the signed-in user, attach an observer to the global authentication object. This observer gets called whenever the user's sign-in state changes. In other words, when we sign in or sign out. So we use on auth state changed on that Firebase auth object. And then we can get information about the user in the observer. Okay, I believe you. So inside component will mount, let's go ahead and start listening for that. Again, we have the auth object already, right? We imported it from base. So let's call on auth state changed. And it looks like that gets a function. Whoa. So it receives a function. And what I'm hoping is that it gives us data that looks kind of like the data that we're used to. So let's see here. Let's just console log that data. And I'm hoping this will happen as soon as we refresh the page. Refresh. Console. I've got this object. And that object has a UID. Okay. So this object has a UID. So it's the same thing as that user object, which means we can just pass it on to auth handler, right? That's what it expects. But this gets called whether we sign in or sign out. So if we sign out, what do we get in console log? Well, I can't sign out yet until I click this, because we're not doing the right thing yet. So let's call sign out, auth state change, and I get null. Okay. So what I can do is I can say if, well, now we know this is that user object, right? So if user, then we know we're already signed in. And we can call this dot auth handler and pass in that user object. And this gets called anytime the state changes. So it gets called when we sign in as well. Which means we no longer really need to call the auth handler from inside the sign in component. So I think we just need to call sign in with pop-up now. We don't need to deal with the promise, because we know we have something in app already listening for the state to change. So we still need auth and GitHub provider here. We don't need auth handler here. We don't need that prop anymore at all. So we'll remove it from there. And when we actually call the sign in component, I just won't pass that in anymore. So we've reduced sign-in's dependencies. It no longer needs the auth handler method passed down. Auth handler will just get called on auth state changed. So we did this inside component will mount because we want to start listening for this to happen right away. So what does this do for us? Let's sign in. Let's not sign out, but let's refresh the page. And although it briefly shows that, it knows we're signed in. Cool. So let's say sync appropriately upon loading when already signed in.